Hello, history buffs, time travelers, and scholars. Colonial America, the land of Puritans, powdered wigs, and a whole lot of rules about how not to have fun. But let's be real, beneath those stuffy bonnets and buckle shoes, people were still people. And people, as history proves time and time again, always find a way to spice things up. The Puritan rules: sex, sin, and sacred bonds in colonial New England. When you think of the Puritans, images of strict folks in black clothes and white bonnets probably come to mind. And you're not far off. They were serious about everything, including sex. In the Puritan settlements of New England, sexuality wasn't just a personal matter. It was tied to their religious beliefs and the moral health of the entire community. To the Puritans, sex was a sacred gift from God meant to strengthen the bond between husband and wife. But there was a catch. It was only allowed within the confines of marriage. Anything outside that, like extramarital affairs or premarital encounters, was considered a grave sin. Such actions weren't just seen as personal failings but as threats to the community's spiritual and moral order. Consequences of breaking the rules. The Puritans didn't take sexual misconduct lightly. If someone stepped out of line, they could expect harsh punishments, ranging from public humiliation to physical discipline. Offenders might find themselves in stocks or pillories, basically colonial versions of a timeout, but much more humiliating. Sermons condemning their actions would follow, ensuring everyone knew what happened. Women faced especially harsh treatment. For example, a woman found guilty of adultery might be forced to wear a scarlet A on her clothing, a punishment famously depicted in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. These public shaming rituals weren't just about punishing the individual, but also about setting an example to deter others from similar behavior. The importance of marriage. Despite their strictness, the Puritans had a surprisingly positive view of sex within marriage. They believed it was essential for love, unity, and even spiritual growth between husband and wife. Fulfilling marital duties was so important that prolonged abstinence in marriage could lead to church intervention. In their eyes, a happy and intimate marriage was a reflection of God's grace. The Puritans were full of contradictions when it came to sex. They could be as strict as a headmaster with a rule book when it came to maintaining moral discipline, but they were surprisingly progressive about intimacy within marriage. To them, sex wasn't just a physical act. It was a spiritual experience, a divine gift meant to deepen the bond between husband and wife. Imagine the Puritan preachers shouting fire and brimstone on Sunday but subtly praising the sacred beauty of marital passion. Awkward, yet heartwarming, right? Sex, for the Puritans, carried weight far beyond the bedroom. It was a moral obligation, a religious duty, and oddly enough, a community issue. If someone misstepped, say, engaged in premarital or extramarital activities, the consequences were felt not just by the individuals, but by the entire community. Keep your sin to yourself, or we're all going to have to answer to God, was basically the unspoken rule. This approach wasn't just about rules, it was about order. By making sex within marriage not only allowed, but celebrated, the Puritans created a structure where intimacy served as a cornerstone of family life and social stability. Yet their stringent stance on any sexual activity outside these bounds left little room for mistakes. Think of it as a societal tightrope walk. One misstep, and you'd fall into public shaming or worse. And while we're on the topic of Puritans, here's a modern twist. If Puritans had YouTube channels, they'd probably end their sermons with something like, "Don't forget to hit like if you value moral discipline and subscribe for more divine truths. Ring the bell for notifications on how to stay pure." Colonial life and the sacred bonds of marriage, a broader perspective. Sexual morality in colonial America wasn't a one-size-fits-all concept. Different regions had their own rules and approaches shaped by religious beliefs, cultural customs, and leadership styles. While New England's Puritans were famously strict, colonies influenced by Anglican or Quaker traditions approached these matters in ways that reflected their unique values. The role of religion and regional differences. In Anglican-dominated colonies like Virginia, the church was central to maintaining social order, but its focus on morality mirrored the hierarchical structure of Southern society. The upper classes were often held to stricter standards, while there was more leniency for the lower classes. This approach reinforced existing social divisions and made morality as much about status as spirituality. In contrast, Quaker communities took a more inward approach. For them, personal accountability and spiritual transformation were key. Quakers emphasized equality and saw each individual as responsible for their own moral decisions, rather than relying heavily on public punishment or external enforcement. These contrasting methods highlight the diversity in colonial interpretations of sexual ethics and the ways religious teachings influence day-to-day life. Marriage, the cornerstone of colonial society. Across all colonies, marriage stood out as a shared pillar of stability. It was far more than just a personal commitment. It was a community cornerstone and a vital institution that supported both moral and practical needs. Colonists viewed marriage as essential for marriage was framed as a divine calling and a safeguard against sin. Sermons and laws emphasized its sanctity, portraying it as God's design for human relationships. Economic stability. Agrarian economies depended on large families. Children weren't just blessings. They were future workers who could help sustain farms and other labor-intensive activities, raising the next generation. Within the framework of marriage, children were taught values like obedience, hard work, and piety. Parents were responsible for instilling these virtues, ensuring the survival of the colony's faith and workforce. The social contract of marriage. Marriage in colonial times also functioned as a social contract that defined household roles. Husbands were expected to lead, balancing authority with responsibility, while wives managed domestic affairs and nurtured the children. These roles reflected the broader colonial views on gender and hierarchy, emphasizing harmony and interdependence within families. Unity amid diversity. Though each colony approached sexual morality differently, whether through strict Puritan discipline, hierarchical Anglican values, or egalitarian Quaker ideals, the universal reverence for marriage united them. Marriage was seen as the foundation of society, ensuring not just personal happiness but the stability and cohesion of entire communities. Whether through the rigidity of Puritan rules, the structured hierarchy of Anglican regions, or the inward focus of Quaker beliefs, marriage was a powerful force, shaping the colonial ethos and the survival of these early settlements. Scandal and virtue. The high stakes of premarital and extramarital, colonial America was a society deeply rooted in religious principles and moral codes, where personal actions could ripple through entire communities. Among the most tightly policed behaviors were those related to sexuality, especially premarital and extramarital activities. The consequences for transgressing these norms were harsh and served as both personal punishment and public warning. The stigma of premarital sex. Premarital sex was not unheard of in colonial America, but it was highly stigmatized. Communities saw such behavior as a betrayal of moral values and a potential threat to the societal order. For women, the consequences were particularly severe. Their chastity was considered a cornerstone of family honor, and any deviation was met with intense scrutiny and harsh judgment. For example, in Puritan New England, a woman who became pregnant out of wedlock might be summoned before a court to confess her sin. This wasn't just a private matter, it was a community spectacle. Public confessions, fines, or even flogging were common penalties. In one case from 1653, Mary Latham of Plymouth Colony confessed to multiple acts of premarital and extramarital relations and was ultimately executed, a grim reminder of the stakes for women caught in these situations. Hasty marriages. To manage the fallout of premarital pregnancies, communities often pressured couples into shotgun weddings. These unions aimed to legitimize children and restore social order. While this approach resolved immediate concerns about appearances, it often led to unhappy marriages and ongoing tensions within families. One well-documented case comes from Virginia, where a young couple, Mary and John, their full names were recorded as Mary Foster and John Graham, were forced to marry after Mary became pregnant. Their marriage, forged under duress, was fraught with challenges. Such stories highlight how societal pressure often prioritized appearances over the well-being of individuals. Adultery. A public scandal, adultery was regarded as an even graver sin than premarital sex because it directly undermined the sanctity of marriage, an institution considered vital for maintaining social and moral stability. Colonial laws reflected this seriousness. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, adultery could lead to public whipping, branding, or even death. One famous case involved a woman named Anne Clark, who was accused of adultery in 1644. She and her alleged lover, James Britton, faced public humiliation and harsh punishment. Clark was forced to wear a scarlet A, a practice that inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, and was ostracized from her community. Even men, though less frequently targeted, faced consequences. In 1639, John Walker of the Plymouth Colony was convicted of adultery and sentenced to public whipping, underscoring that while gendered double standards existed, men were not entirely immune to judgment.
Gendered morality. The disparity in how men and women were treated for sexual misconduct reveals much about colonial gender roles. Women's behavior was scrutinized more closely, as their virtue was seen as a reflection of their family's honor and the community's moral fabric. Men, by contrast, were often excused for similar actions, their transgressions framed as lapses in judgment rather than fundamental challenges to social order. This double standard was not confined to legal punishment. Social repercussions often weighed more heavily on women. A man might recover his reputation over time, but a woman labeled as fallen could face lifelong ostracism. Broader implications of sexual misconduct. The consequences of premarital and extramarital behavior extended beyond the individuals involved. Such actions were seen as potential catalysts for divine wrath. Many colonists believed that moral failings could bring about disasters like poor harvests, epidemics, or even attacks by Native Americans. As a result, communities felt justified in intervening in private lives to maintain collective purity. A complex moral landscape. Despite these rigid norms, colonial attitudes toward sexuality were not entirely repressive. Within marriage, sexual intimacy was celebrated as a divine gift and a way to foster love and unity. Procreation was also essential for ensuring economic survival and expanding the population. Sermons often extolled the virtues of a loving marital relationship, emphasizing the importance of fulfilling conjugal duties. This duality, condemning sexual sin while celebrating marital intimacy, reflects the complexities of colonial morality. It wasn't just about maintaining discipline. It was also about creating a framework that balanced individual behavior with communal needs. The history of premarital and extramarital sex in colonial America offers a fascinating window into the values and power dynamics of the time. The rigid enforcement of morality, the unequal treatment of men and women, and the deep intertwining of religion and law reveal how societies can use moral codes to uphold order and reinforce hierarchy. While modern attitudes towards sexuality have evolved, the legacy of these early moral frameworks can still be seen in contemporary debates about gender, morality, and societal expectations. The stories of individuals like Mary Latham and Anne Clark remind us that the past is never as distant as it seems, and the struggles for fairness and understanding are as old as society itself. In colonial America, sexual morality was about much more than personal choices. It was a key part of keeping society orderly and disciplined. These values were deeply tied to the way people lived and were seen as reflecting a divine plan. Marriage, family, and community involvement played major roles in upholding these standards. It wasn't just about what individuals did. It was about maintaining a social structure based on religious and cultural beliefs. By following strict sexual rules, colonial communities aimed to build a well-disciplined, harmonious society that matched their spiritual and moral ideals. Thank you for watching That Why in History. We truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. See you again soon.